In this video, we will travel to Africa to show you how ordinary Africans live, what they eat, where they sleep and how they get food. To get from one village to another, we need transport, and here's what their local buses look like. It's a truck with a wooden roof and benches. As you can see, people have to cram in the back as tightly as possible. I couldn't find any timetables or routes anywhere, so I had no other option than to rent a car. I got this tiny miracle, most likely created by the Chinese car industry. I found out there was no steering wheel inside, or rather, it was there, but on the passenger seat. I realized that they have left-handed traffic. At first I was afraid to drive this way. The first thing that surprised and frustrated me was a large amount of garbage. It was everywhere, in the yards, by the roads, between houses, and even where the cows and goats graze. People can easily cut themselves or step on something sharp because most of them walk barefoot. At least it's good to know that sometimes they reuse this garbage and make unusual fences out of it. While driving through the countryside, I passed a house with many children in the yard. I had some candies in my pocket and the kids were very happy to take them. After that, I showed them my smartphone and turned on the selfie camera. They watched themselves on the screen and, judging by their reaction, it was the first time they saw this device. There was an elderly woman next to the house who seemed to be in charge. After some negotiations, I paid a certain amount of money and got access to their courtyard to see how everything was organized. Another woman was sitting nearby, and her bright and interesting pedicure caught my eye. Their land was surrounded by a high fence and a huge gate made of old sacks. Even though the house itself was made of sticks and some mud, it looked pretty sturdy. Colorful goats were sleeping by the wall. I hope they sometimes go for a walk on the grass. There was an enclosure with a bicycle, a hen and her chicks. There were no doors inside the house or between the rooms, just curtains. Now you can see the corridor with some stuff. And this was probably the bedroom, but instead of beds, there was just a piece of old foam covered with rags. However, they had a fairly big bathroom with a canister of water, a piece of soap and a piece of sack instead of a sponge for washing. All this time I was followed by the children, curious to see what I was doing. Driving a couple more kilometers, I noticed children riding on a wooden cart pulled by a cow, reaching a speed of whopping 20 kilometers per hour. I jumped out of the car and ran to them to hitch a ride too. The guy didn't mind and took me on board, and it was really fun. Afterward, I headed to a relatively large village to explore its streets. The first place I found was a fish market, with fish lying on the ground. One man was sharpening knives and 3 were cleaning the goods. There was a platform where a man with a stick probably held an auction, and the locals were bidding for small piles of fish. I guess this man won. A small clothing market was located right under a large tree nearby. There I spotted a counter with a pretty decent assortment of sneakers, although the sellers themselves had not so fancy shoes. Also, there was a stall where a guy made some drinks. I had no idea what it was, but I ordered one to try. The guy took 2 strange sticks and inserted them into a device with 2 shafts inside. The sticks cracked and released a great amount of some milk-like liquid. In a moment, I realized that these 2 sticks were sugar canes, so the drink must be sweet and probably quite tasty. And I was right, the liquid was even too sweet for me, so I gave the juice to a passerby. He seemed to be quite surprised, but happy about the gift. Try to guess what this is. No, these aren't plants or fruits. These are dried octopuses. I don't know what the locals do to them, but they look kind of creepy. These are huge bars of soap. They're probably cheaper in this form than packaged in small bars. Then I met this guy who seemed nice at first and even sang a song. He told me that he was going the same way and that he could show me something interesting. I like interesting things, so I followed him. He was walking barefoot on rocks and garbage. Apparently, the skin on his feet was already very thick. Still, at one point a thorn stuck in it. I willingly helped him get it out. So we continued on our walk. At one point, the man entered the yard, plucked an aloe leaf and rubbed it on my slightly sunburnt arm. After that, he told me that I owed him $5 for the medical services. I didn't expect this turn of events, so I replied that in this case he owed me $10 for getting the thorn out of his foot. He thought for a moment, called me a Russian fool and went home. It was an unpleasant incident, but I didn't get upset and kept exploring the village. That's when I saw a woman and children near a house. I was curious to see what they had in their yard, and she kindly invited me in. I didn't know why, but she was laughing hysterically all the time. They had a resting place with a colorful mat right by the fence, a small vegetable garden that required some more attention, a small kitchen with 3 stones to cook cookware on and make fire underneath. And the most interesting thing was the African toilet, consisting of 2 flat stones on which you apparently have to stand and do everything you need. After that, you have to get some water and pour it between the bricks so that it drags away all the waste into this hole. But what surprised me the most was the automatic gate closing mechanism made of rope and a bottle filled with sand. The gravity pulled the bottle down and the rope held the door shut. Later, fortune smiled upon me and I met this guy. He could speak English, more or less, and agreed to accompany me to some places of interest. We went to his home, where he had to leave his bike, and I got an opportunity to visit another house. There was practically nothing inside. His father was sitting on the floor, looking at the wall instead of the TV. It's hard to believe, but this house was considered really cool because it had a toilet. Needless to say, there was no electricity, and they lit the place with a homemade oil lamp. This guy's name is Juma. He took me to the ocean where he and his friends practiced performing acrobatic tricks. They have a dream of creating a team to perform in other countries, and to be honest, they are doing pretty well. Next, he took a big coil of wire and led me to the trees. I was worried that they might try to tie me up, but it turned out it was a prop for an interesting trick, in which Juma had to walk along the wire tensioned between 2 trees. I've seen videos of people walking on a thick rope on the internet, but walking on a thin wire with bare feet seemed impossible to me. They didn't have a camera, so they asked me to record their performance. Luckily, I had a laptop, so I edited a nice short video and gave it to them on a flash drive. The ocean and its clear blue water looked marvelous. There were a lot of fishing boats near the shore, but at one point the water level started to drop and the ocean was receding far from the coast. I couldn't understand what was happening, but it turned out that it was a beginning of a low tide, as a result of which the water level decreased by several meters, to such an extent that all the ships settled on the bottom. The sand and coral reefs that had been recently hiding under the deep water became exposed, forming a huge, about a kilometer-long shallow area. Obviously, the boats couldn't sail without water, so fishermen just sat down and waited for the water to return. On the other hand, the receding water was pretty good for people who didn't have boats, so they all rushed to the ocean in search of some food. Juma said this was our chance to see a lot of interesting stuff and took me for a walk along with these people. We had to be careful with these coral reefs covered with a lot of sharp rocks, as well as an abundance of these scary sea urchins. They seemed to sense my presence and approached my feet, trying to sting me. They are quite dangerous creatures. Stings can be very painful to a person. Look at what happened to the poor fish who didn't manage to escape and stumbled on one of these sea urchins. We also found a huge green starfish trying to survive the low tide in a small puddle. In fact, it doesn't have 5 legs, but hundreds of them. There are many smaller legs with suction cups inside the slits in the starfish's body, which it uses to move around and probably grab food. Another specimen we found had narrow limbs. Apparently one of them was somehow lost or bitten off by a predator. But don't worry, a new one was already growing in its place. At a distance of about a kilometer from the shore, many women were walking along the reefs with some sticks. They poked these sticks under the rocks, but I didn't understand why. When we approached one of them, it turned out that they were hunting octopuses, which could hide in various burrows. Of course, I felt sorry for the octopus, but people also need food to survive. As we walked towards the ocean, I noticed an old man sitting on the sand, crafting oddly shaped boxes out of twigs. I had no idea what they were used for, but later we saw the exact same device on the seabed. It turned out to be a trap for sea creatures, and there seemed to be something inside. Yes, 2 small fish had gotten in there. The kids were also helping their parents, collecting seashells like this, which they probably boiled and then ate. Flying over a nearby beach, I noticed multiple formations that resembled groups of soldiers before battle in a desert. As I got closer, I realized these were underwater seabeds used by Africans to grow underwater plants. If I can remember correctly, it was called laminaria. These women have only a few hours to get to their underwater gardens to harvest their crops or plant new ones before the water returns. The water was getting higher and higher, so we, together with the other people, were forced to go ashore before the water covered us completely. Now it was the fishermen's time, and these conditions allowed their boats to sail out into the ocean. This was the first episode of our African adventure. The second part will be even more interesting, and we do our best to edit and release it as soon as possible.